Okay, let's unpack this. You know how you might have your mother's eyes or your father's nose,
Hmm.
but you're definitely not an identical twin to either of them, or even, to your own siblings.
Right. It's that really fascinating blend, isn't it? Family resemblance, but also total uniqueness.
Yeah, exactly. And we see it everywhere. I mean, obviously in our families, but also think about farming, how plants and animals have been selectively bred for ages. Huge diversity there.
For sure. And for a long time, how this actually worked biologically, this mix of similarity and variation, what we just call family resemblance, it's a real mystery.
But then, the 20th century, boom, genetics arrives.
Mm.
The actual science of studying heredity and inherited variation.
And what's really key here, I think, is that to truly get it, we need to go deep. I mean, from the whole organism, like us, down to our cells, and even deeper to the molecules inside those cells.
So today's deep dive is really about those fundamental processes, the ones that make sure life carries on, but also the ones that generate all this amazing variety.
Yeah, we're talking about how our bodies pass on information, genetic information, and how that information gets, well, shuffled around to make each of us and every living thing really unique.
Okay, so our mission today,
Yeah.
let's take a really close look at how chromosomes, those packages of genetic info, get passed from parents to offspring, especially in organisms that reproduce sexually.
And we'll explore two absolutely critical processes. First, meiosis, that's a special type of cell division. And second, fertilization, the fusion of sperm and egg.
Right, and these aren't just, textbook terms. They are literally the foundation of who you are listening right now and why life on Earth is just so incredibly varied.
We'll guide you through it step by step, trying to make this microscopic world, well, come alive and show why it matters way beyond just passing a biology exam.
Okay, so let's start there. If it's not literally your mother's nose or your father's eyes getting passed down, what is actually being inherited?
It's the instructions, coded information, basically, in these hereditary units we call genes.
Genes, okay?
Yeah, think of them like precise sequences of DNA letters. It's like a symbolic language. Your brain turns the letters APPLE into the idea of an apple.
Mm-hmm.
Well, your cells read the language of genes to build specific proteins. And it's the combined action of all these proteins that produces your traits, like freckles or hair color.
And this DNA, this genetic blueprint, it's not just loose inside our cells, is it? It's organized somehow.
Oh, absolutely. In our kinds of cells, eukaryotes, so animals, plants, fungi, the DNA is incredibly neatly packaged. It's coiled up into these structures called chromosomes, kept safe inside the cell's nucleus.
Chromosomes, right.
And every species has a specific number. Humans, for example, we have 46 in almost all our cells, the somatic cells, the body cells.
46.
Yep. And each chromosome is essentially one super long DNA molecule, just elaborately coiled around proteins. And get this, a single chromosome can carry hundreds, maybe thousands of different genes, each at a very specific spot, its locus.
Wow. Okay, so we have this highly organized genetic info. How does that relate to reproduction and, the variety we see?
Great question. It really boils down to two main ways organisms reproduce: asexual and sexual.
Asexual. That's like cloning.
Pretty much, yeah. A single individual is the only parent. It passes on exact copies of all its genes, no mixing, no fusion of special cells. Think of like bacteria dividing or yeast budding.
Or like some plants, maybe.
Exactly. Like a hydra budding off a new one, or those redwood trees that sprout clones from the stump. The offspring are basically genetically identical to the parent. Any tiny differences are usually just random mistakes, mutations in the DNA copying.
Okay, so that's asexual, minimal variation. But then there's sexual reproduction.
And that's where, as you said, the magic of uniqueness really happens. Here you have two parents contributing genetic material.
Right, combining information.
Precisely. So the offspring get unique combinations of genes. They're not clones, they're variations on a theme, you could say. Genetically different from their siblings and from both parents.
And that's the source of all that variation we see.
It's a massive source, yes. And the key to understanding how that variation happens lies in the behavior of those chromosomes during the life cycle.
Okay, so let's dig into that. Chromosome behavior. You mentioned humans have 46. How does that work?
Right, 46 in our somatic cells. If you were to actually take a picture of them during cell division and arrange them, you'd see they come in pairs. 23 pairs, to be exact.
Pairs. Why pairs?
Because we inherit one set from each parent. So for each of the 23 types of chromosome, you have one maternal version and one paternal version. These matching pairs are called homologous chromosomes, or homologs for short.
Homologous chromosomes. Okay.
Okay.
And they match up.
Yeah, they're typically the same length. The centromere that pinched apart is in the same spot. And crucially, they carry genes for the same inherited characteristics like eye color at the main locations or loci.
So one gene for eye color from mom, one from dad on that pair.
Exactly. Now, there's one pair that's a bit different, the sex chromosomes.
X and
Yep. Females usually have two X chromosomes, XX. Males have an X and a Y, XY. They determine biological sex. All the other 22 pairs are called autosomes.
So just to be clear, our 46 chromosomes are really two sets of 23. One set inherited from mom, one from dad.
You got it. That's fundamental.
And there's terminology for this, right? Diploid and haploid.
Perfect. Yes. We use the letter N to represent the number of chromosomes in a single set. So for humans, N equals 23.
Okay.
Any cell with two chromosome sets, like our somatic cells, is called diploid. We abbreviate it 2N. So for humans, 2N equals 46.
Makes sense. Two sets, 2N, 46 total.
Right. And even when the DNA copies itself before division, so each chromosome temporarily has two identical sister chromatids stuck together, the cell is still considered diploid 2N because it only has two sets of genetic information. Those chromatids are just copies.
Okay. So if our body cells are diploid, what about sperm and eggs, the reproductive cells?
Well, they are different. Gametes, sperm, and eggs contain only a single set of chromosomes. They are haploid cells.
Haploid, so they just have adding chromosomes.
Exactly. For humans, N equals 23. That set has 22 autosomes and one sex chromosome. An egg always has an X. A sperm can have either an X or a Y.
Wow. Okay, so why is that important? Why haploid?
Think about it. If gametes were also diploid, 2N, what would happen when they fuse during fertilization?
2N plus 2N would be 4N. The chromosome number would double.
Every single generation. It would spiral out of control. So nature has this incredibly elegant solution, meiosis.
Meiosis, that's the special cell division you mentioned.
That's the one. In sexually reproducing organisms, gamete formation involves meiosis. Its whole purpose is to reduce the number of chromosome sets from 2 diploid down to 1 haploid.
So it halves the number.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It perfectly counterbalances the doubling that happens at fertilization. Fertilization restores the diploid number, N plus N equals 2N, and meiosis cuts it back down to haploid, 2N, for the next generation's gametes. It keeps the chromosome count stable.
That's actually really elegant, this balance.
It really is. And this balance between fertilization restoring the diploid number and meiosis reducing it back to haploid is universal in sexual reproduction, though the timing can vary quite a bit between different groups of organisms.
How so?
Well, in animals like us, the gametes are pretty much the only haploid cells. Fertilization happens, you get a diploid zygote, and that zygote divides by mitosis, the regular cell division for growth, to make the whole diploid organism.
Okay, that sounds familiar.
But then you look at plants and some algae, they have this fascinating thing called alternation of generations. They actually have multicellular diploid stages, A and D multicellular haploid stages.
Oh, really? Both?
Yep. The diploid plant, called a sporophyte, makes haploid spores using meiosis. Those spores then grow using mitosis into a whole separate haploid plant called a gameophyte. And that haploid plant makes the gametes, but it uses mitosis because it's already haploid.
That's wild. Different life strategies.
Totally different. And then fungi and some protists. Often, after the gametes fuse to make the diploid zygote, meiosis happens immediately. So the only diploid part of their life is that single cell. The rest of the time, the organism growing and living is haploid.
Okay, so lots of variations on the theme.
Yeah.
But the core result is the same.
The core result, especially relevant for our discussion, is genetic variation among the offspring produced sexually. And that brings us right to the mechanics, the how of meiosis itself. And remember, only diploid cells can do meiosis. Haploid cells already have just one set. They can't reduce it further.
Right. Okay, so meiosis, how does it actually do this? Having the chromosomes and creating variety, you said it's different from mitosis.
Very different. Mitosis is one division, makes two identical cells. Meiosis involves two consecutive cell divisions, meiosis the first and meiosis the second.
2 rounds.
2 rounds, and the result is 4 daughter cells, not 2. And each of those 4 has only half the number of chromosomes as the original parent cell.
4 haploid cells from 1 diploid cell.
You got it. Let's try and visualize it, starting with meiosis the first. This is where the homologous chromosomes separate.
The pairs we talked about, one from mom, one from dad.
Exactly. It starts with prophase I. Chromosomes condense, become visible. But here's the amazing part. The homologous pairs find each other. They line up perfectly, gene for gene. It's called synapsis.
They actually pair up physically.
They do, held together by proteins, and then something incredible happens. Crossing over.
Crossing over, I've heard of that. What is it exactly?
Imagine those paired chromosomes. Their DNA strands literally break in the exact same places, and then they rejoin, but they swap pieces. A segment from the maternal chromosome gets attached to the paternal one, and vice versa.
So they exchange bits of DNA.
They do. It creates new hybrid chromosomes that have bits from both parents mixed together on the same strand. We call these recombinant chromosomes. It's like shuffling the genetic deck within the chromosomes themselves, even before the cell divides.
Wow, okay, that sounds like a major source of variation right there.
It absolutely is. So, after crossing over in prophase I, we get to metaphase I. Now, these homologous pairs still linked where they crossed over line up at the center of the cell, the metaphase plate.
Okay.
And here's another key point. How each pair lines up is totally random. Like, for pair #1, the maternal one could be on the left and paternal on the right, or vice versa. And how pair #1 lines up has absolutely no influence on how pair #2 lines up. It's independent.
Independent assortment. That sounds important too.
Hugely important for variation, as we'll see. Then comes anaphase I, the homologous chromosomes separate. The maternal one goes one way, the paternal one goes the other way, towards opposite poles of the cell.
The pairs split up.
Yes. But, and this is crucial, the sister chromatids stay together. Remember, each chromosome was copied earlier, so it consists of 2 sister chromatids. In anaphase I, the whole duplicated chromosome, both sister chromatids still attached, moves as one unit.
Okay, so unlike mitosis where sister chromatids separate, here it's the homologous pairs separating first.
Exactly. That's a massive difference. Finally, telophase ornue and cytokinesis. The cell divides into 2. Each new cell is now haploid. It only has one set of chromosomes, 23 in humans. But each of those chromosomes still consists of the 2 sister chromatids.
So 2 haploid cells, but the chromosomes are still duplicated.
Right. And importantly, thanks to crossing over, those sister chromatids are probably not identical anymore. And there's no more DNA copying before meiosis II starts.
Okay, round 1 complete. What happens in meiosis II?
And meiosis II is actually much more like mitosis. It's about separating those sister chromatids that stay together through meiosis the cyst.
Okay.
So in each of the 2 haploid cells from meiosis I, you get prophase II, new spindle forms. Then metaphase II, the chromosomes, each still with 2 chromatids, line up at the center again.
Like in mitosis.
Very much like mitosis metaphase. But remember, because of crossing over, the 2 sister chromatids on a single chromosome might not be identical now.
All right, they might have swapped segments.
Then, anaphase V. This time, the proteins holding the sister chromatids together do break down. The sister chromatids finally separate and move to opposite poles. Now they are considered individual chromosomes.
So now the sister chromatids split.
Now they split. And finally, telophase dive and cytokinesis. Nuclei reform, the cells divide, and the end result.
4 cells.
4 haploid daughter cells. And the amazing thing, all 4 are genetically distinct from each other and also genetically distinct from the original diploid cell that started the whole process.
Wow. So just to recap the big picture difference. Mitosis gives you 2 identical diploid cells, basically for growth and repair. Meiosis gives you 4 unique haploid cells for sexual reproduction.
Perfectly put. And those 3 events unique to meiosis, the pairing and crossing over of homologs, the alignment of pairs, not individual chromosomes, at the metaphase plate, and the separation of those homologs, not sister chromatids, in anaphase. Those are the keys to both, reducing the chromosome number and generating variation.
Okay, so let's connect that directly back to variation. We started by talking about family resemblance and uniqueness. How do these meiosis mechanics create that?
Right. So we know mutations create new alleles, new gene versions in the first place, but sexual reproduction through meiosis and fertilization is what really shuffles these existing alleles into brand new combinations. There are 3 main ways this happens.
3 main engines of variation.
Okay. First, independent assortment of chromosomes. Remember metaphase I, how each homologous pair lines up randomly?
Yeah, maternal left, paternal right, or vice versa, independent of the other pairs.
Exactly. Think about it for humans, with 23 pairs. For the first pair, there are 2 possibilities for how they line up. For the second pair, 2 possibilities. For the third, 2, all the way to the 23rd pair.
So it's 2 times 2 times 2, 23 times.
Precisely. 2 to the power of 23. That number is huge. It's over 8.4 million.
Wait, 8.4 million possible combinations of just maternal and paternal chromosomes in a single sperm or egg, just from how they line up.
Just from independent assortment alone? Each gamete you produce is one of roughly 8.4 million possibilities, just based on which parental chromosome from each pair it happens to get.
That's staggering already. But you said there were three mechanisms.
Right, because that 8.4 million is actually an underestimate of the true variety.
Okay.
Because of mechanism number 2, crossing over.
Ah, the swapping of DNA segments we talked about in Profi.
Exactly. That process creates those recombinant chromosomes that are now mosaics, carrying DNA from both your mother and your father on the same strand. A chromosome that started out purely maternal might now have paternal chunks, and vice versa.
So it's not just shuffling whole chromosomes, it's shuffling pieces within chromosomes.
Yes.
Hmm.
And in humans, there's usually 1 to 3 crossover events per chromosome pair on average. This multiplies the number of possible genetic combinations enormously, way beyond the 8.4 million from just assortment. Because now, even the sister chromatids that separate in meiosis II aren't identical.
Okay, mind blown. Independent assortment plus crossing over.
Yeah.
The number of unique gametes must be astronomical.
It really is. But wait, there's one more layer. Mechanism number 3, random fertilization.
Meaning, which sperm meets which egg.
Exactly. It's completely random which one of those 8.4 million plus possible sperm fuses with which one of those 8.4 million plus possible eggs.
So you multiply those numbers together.
You do. 8.4 million times 8.4 million. That's about 70 trillion possible diploid combinations for the zygote, the first cell of a new individual.
70 trillion.
70 trillion possible unique genetic combinations from just one pair of parents, and that's still without fully factoring in the almost infinite variety added by crossing over.
Wow. Okay, so when we say everyone is unique,
Mm.
genetically, that's putting it mildly.
Putting it very mild. You really are unique. The odds of 2 siblings, other than identical twins who come from the same zygote, being genetically identical are practically 0.
So what's the bigger picture here? Why is all this variation so important?
It's the bedrock of evolution. Think about it. Mutations create new possibilities, but sexual reproduction through independent assortment, crossing over, and random fertilization creates countless combinations of those possibilities in every generation.
So it generates diversity within a population.
Massive diversity. And when the environment changes, a new disease appears, the climate shifts, a new predator arrives. Having all that variation means it's more likely that some individuals in the population will have combinations of traits that allow them to survive and reproduce in the new conditions.
Ah, so variation is the raw material for natural selection to act upon.
Precisely. It's what allows species to adapt and evolve over time. Without this constant generation of variation through sexual reproduction, populations would be much more vulnerable, much less adaptable. It's truly the engine driving the incredible diversity and resilience of life.
Wow. Okay. We have definitely covered a lot of ground today. We started with that basic idea of inheritance, how genes, those DNA instructions, get passed down on chromosomes.
Then we tracked how those chromosomes behave through sexual life cycles, focusing on that crucial balance between diploid cells 2N and haploid gametes N, maintained by fertilization and meiosis.
Right. And then we dove deep into meiosis itself, that two-stage division. We saw the pairing, the crossing over, the independent assortment, all leading to 4 genetically unique haploid cells.
Yeah, that elegant cellular dance. And finally, we saw how independent assortment, crossing over, and random fertilization work together to create just astronomical levels of genetic variation, making every individual produced sexually truly one of a kind.
It really is amazing.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Thinking about this immense built-in genetic diversity that underlies everything.
Right.
How does that knowledge fundamentally shape how we think about ourselves, our identity, our health, and maybe even the future of life on Earth, especially with all the environmental changes happening now?
That's definitely something to ponder. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the blueprint of you. We hope you've gained a new appreciation for the elegant, complex, and, yeah, deeply personal science of genetics.